Meanwhile, Taylor Swift is putting millions of tons of CO2 into the atmosphere, traveling to her hundreds of gigs all around the world.
Let's not fall out over Swifty. I wouldn't criticise her publicly because, you know, do it at the moment.
Welcome back, everyone. We're welcoming our third guest to the SaaSy AF podcast. We are blessed with the presence of the marvelous Mr. Richard Fearn, who has an extraordinary background, and I don't know how he fits most of what he does into a day. He's an experienced tech. He's an experienced tech investor with over 15 years experience in the space. He's invested in over 100 companies, including 2 of my own, which I'm sure we'll dive into of how I was able to convince him to do that. He also has investments in companies such as What3Words, Revolut, and SpaceX. And he's currently working on a musical on Broadway with the legendary rapper Nas, and is the executive producer on his feature film launch later this year. He's also the chairman of the health tech company Healthily, which you should check out. And yeah, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Richard. It's an absolute pleasure to have you, and I'm looking forward to hearing I'm looking forward to hearing some of the horror stories and how we were able to convince you to invest in us.
Well, listen, it's an absolute pleasure to be talking to you this morning, and thank you for the introduction. The answer to how I get it all done is I just surround myself with better people to do a lot of it for me, because I'm very lucky like that. So it's an interesting life.
And for our viewers at home, I tend to whenever I want to get Richard cornered on a conversation, I will typically reach out to his amazing sort of operations person, who I believe is currently nursing or recovering from an eye operation. So we wish her all the best. I think she's doing her best Blackbeard impression.
She's currently got an eye patch on, is recovering from eye surgery. Absolutely wish her well. She is the absolute light of my life, and make sure that my life runs as smoothly as it possibly can. I'm probably not the easiest person to work with, but she's an absolute legend.
Yeah, so I suppose let's actually touch on that point, Richard, because you opened with saying about the how you are able to do everything that you do, which is an incredible amount of things. Like I know from our personal relationship goes back, I want to say around 5 years now, from whenever we were in Techstars. And I remember how busy you were then, and I can only imagine that you're continually getting busier and busier. So how do you go about finding those people and keeping the likes of Sadie on board with the franticness that you experience, and sort of not on the same level as yours, but I sort of have a similar sort of life where I have to surround myself with those people. So we'd love to get your insight on that as sort of a kickoff.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, firstly, you work a shed load harder than me, so let's make sure that you know that. One of the things that I was initially impressed by was your level of productivity. Now, whether behind the scenes that's because you have a million minions doing stuff for you, but either way,
it is.
You manage it very well. So, props to you on that. As for me, the interesting thing about what I've kind of learned to do over the last 15 years is, originally there was a tremendous amount of networking to do in the tech space. A lot of that was done via the accelerators, the C camps, and the Techstars of this world, and various others. And obviously those congregate a whole bunch of people conveniently in one place many times over. So you kind of have a very useful sieve to kind of get through and work out who's really worth knowing, who's very giving with their time and giving with their information. I mean, I think, I'm less deeply involved in those sort of things now, but when I started, let's say 2011, 12, the feeling in London was, this was really an interesting time. We were trying to build something in terms of making it more of a credible tech center, which it wasn't particularly before. And as a result, the feeling from everyone was kind of very much a team spirit. Let's do this together. Everything, you sit on my shoulders, I'll sit on yours. We're raising the whole city up. We're raising the whole country up. And it's not worth it's worth being collaborative. It's worth paying it forward, giving your time, because you will get it back. I spent a lot of time mentoring. I spent a lot of time, I guess, giving up my time to do stuff, and and obviously hanging out with incredibly inspiring entrepreneurs and investors is hardly a waste of my time. It was incredibly enriching use of my time. But what it meant was that people were very giving back to me in terms of their time, in terms of information, in terms of introductions. So ultimately, it was about me working out of those, having a reasonably good instinct about who were good people, who were generous people, who were honest people. In every world you get people who are and people who aren't, and I've got a reasonably good instinct, hopefully, for working out who is.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that from just to speak to that point, and props to you that you've dug us out of quite a few holes, whether that's by giving us 15 minutes of time just to run over things, or whether it's, oh, we need a top up on our investment because we've got a project coming along in the year. There is that incredible generosity that is that's felt on our side, and anybody that I speak to, I can't speak highly enough of you. So I suppose that then leads me on to the question of, you've obviously got a profile, right? So like, if anybody Googles your name, they'll find you on TechCrunch, they'll find you on LinkedIn. I'm sure you get outreaches, pitch decks on probably an hourly basis. You've probably got 10 in your inbox from whenever we come off this podcast. So how do you take that and sift through the people that you actually want to work with, or that you even want to focus on? Is it now, or I suppose if we could break it down into the journey that you've taken, have you gone from these are the things that I think are going to be, ultimately make me cash, and then has that evolved into passion? And could you give a bit about the story about that trajectory that you've taken from how you review and how you view investments?
Well, what was interesting when I started, myself and a few other angel investors were kind of congregated through Warner Yard, which was a hub where Techstars was originally based for some years, kind of, I guess, in sort of 2012 onwards. And during that period, we made the decision that we would operate a little bit more like Silicon Valley angels, in the sense that we try and keep the paperwork fairly simple, which is good for both sides. And we're talking pre-seed and seed, right? So overcomplicating it, you're always suspicious investors are trying to overcomplicate things at that stage, because essentially it means they're not really understanding the process. So the idea was keep it simple. The idea was to have skin in the game, to do multiple deals a year, maybe up to 10 deals a year, and to essentially be a fairly light touch investor, right? Which is that I have never launched a hugely successful startup. I'm in awe of those who do, and I accept what I can bring and what I can't. I want to invest in people who I believe are the best in their space and can do the job they need to do. What I'm there for is absolutely for help with funding, both in network funding and obviously my own. I'm there for advice on core areas like marketing and brand, because that was my previous background in advertising. And I'm there also to be someone to talk to. The journey of an entrepreneur is an incredibly tough one. There are so many challenges. The pressure on the individuals involved is huge. The pressures from external shareholders and investors on them is huge. And sometimes you just need someone in the room who wants to listen and give you some advice about where you're at, right? And at first I thought that was a really soft thing to offer. And I thought, well, that's, I thought, well, what use is that going to be? And I was feeling a bit of an imposter. What can I add? And what I've learned over the years is that can be an incredibly powerful thing to help entrepreneurs get through incredibly tough times. And actually just to be someone who they know I'm going to give them an honest opinion. They know that if I don't know the answer, I'll find someone who does. And that's just reassuring that I'm not kind of going, how can I take over more of your business, or how can I force you into an area I want to go in? But that's not my objective. Ultimately, it's about streamlining your life so you do the job better, and you obviously grow the company, which benefits everybody ultimately.
Yeah. And I suppose that leads me to the question, why the fuck did you invest in us?
Believe it or not, and despite your modesty, you are both a compelling individual. You're a charming man. You're incredibly productive. You get stuff done, and here's another one. Actually, you were introduced by another entrepreneur I have enormous respect for. So
Yeah.
that's another important thing. An important thing why, if you're a starting out founder, that congregating with other founders, apart from sharing your pain stories, which I'm sure is very therapeutic for you, those people have got networks themselves, and those people can obviously recommend you to people. So our joint friend Pete Johnson obviously initially gave you the nod, if you like, and
Yep.
and just just that warm intro means that I'm listening in a way that I wasn't listening before. And then from that point on, just to be clear, it wasn't it wasn't some nepotism there. From that point
Yep.
on, you impressed me hugely. You continue to do so. So
Yeah.
I think Aaron's just
yeah.
invited you on so he can get an ego boost here. Is that the real
Uh,
reason behind this?
I mean,
the-
I was oh, you just interrupted the but. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, but there are some issues, right? The fact he can't concentrate on one business, trying to get me invested in two. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, okay, what are you doing this on Saturday nights? When you're meant to be doing the other job. But no, it's because you're pretty impressive.
Yeah, well, I think that it's a good point to mention and throw out a prop to our mutual friend Pete Johnson, who
Yes.
is I'm not too sure. I haven't spoken to him in quite some time. Does he still have his Irish accent?
He does. He does. He's now got a young son, and that's a fascinating one because obviously his wife Catherine's American, and so that's an interesting one to where the child will end up. But I think, as inevitably when you're an expat, and I've experienced this in other countries, you tend to sort of almost double down on your origin. Just to maintain your specialness in the new environment. So I think he quite enjoys being an Irishman abroad. So
Yeah,
all
yeah.
right.
Well, it's been a common thread. Our two first guests happen to be part of the Irish diaspora, and sort of
Yeah.
there's that. I don't just from the context of sitting in Belfast right now. I never like referring to it as the Irish Mafia, so I'd prefer to describe it as the Irish Tech Mafia. The Irish Mafia has its own negative connotations that I would prefer to avoid.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely that serendipity that I found, exactly as you said, that where if you don't know somebody that if I come to you with an introduction we need, or with a problem we need to solve, if you can't solve it, you'll know somebody that can, and it's that serendipity that I think has helped us immensely over the past few years. So
And this was, I mean,
with
back to so back to just another point about what you were saying about how, the journey of how I sift through, pitches and what have you now. I mean, I think, I started fairly aggressively, and probably in the last 4 or 5, or last 3 or 4 years, probably post pandemic, actually, I've settled my life down a little bit. You're trying to make sure I've got two boys, sort of 14 and 17. They go through important parts of their school lives and lives, and so I've tried to balance my life a bit and balance my life into creative projects and stuff like that. So actually now, in a way, I'm benefiting from all the networking contacts I made in the early days, because now I probably sift via other angels and VCs and other founders, and kind of let those ones as recommendations come my way. And I'm probably investing much less in new. I'm probably investing more in the US than I am in the UK at the moment. So yeah, it's just, it shifts, and but you can't get to where I am and come up with good deal flow unless, you've done all the hard yards in the first place to get some strong contacts.
Yeah, well, I think that just speaks to that you have to put the hard work in at the start in order for for it to get easier later down the road. What like we're all aware of the sort of the governmental shift and stuff in the UK. Is there any specific reason that you've moved your investments, or like moved your focus towards US companies, or is that just a happenstance kind of thing?
It's a slight happenstance. It's slightly evolved out of the likes of Peter and a few other colleagues I've got in the States that they've built some pretty phenomenal networks stateside. There is without doubt, globally, a massive bias in terms of what wins probably
Yeah.
does start in Austin or in Silicon Valley or wherever. I mean, that's been the case for a long time, and it's not hugely different now. Absolutely, Europe brings its unicorns. Absolutely, The professionalization of entrepreneurship in Europe has been huge, and it's a very exciting place still. But if I'm going to invest less, as in not necessarily less money, but on less companies, then maybe moving it towards those where I've got a higher chance of an outcome makes more sense. Now, that doesn't mean I'm abandoning the Isles, doesn't mean I'm abandoning Europe. It means that I'm just probably a little bit more picky on what I see and what I don't.
Yeah, and I think you've got the upside in the States, obviously, of it being a lot more of a entrepreneurial focused culture, whereas we're still still on these islands very much focused on we need as many lawyers, accountants, and consultants in McKinsey as possible. And it's we're less focused on, you know, go out and build companies. There's the obvious incredible stories, the Monzos, the Revoluts, the wise, I call them the wise guys, but the transfer wise guys, who've all came out of that. And is there, outside there being the obvious answer of, you know, City of London being there, Lloyd's of London being there, is there any specific reason that you see sort of fintech being the place? Like, I'm sure you've had this issue with yourself with banking in the States is a fucking shit show. Like, it's so archaic. It takes days for transactions to clear. You know, you've got people chasing you for payments that you've already paid. Whereas we've obviously got open banking here, and we're a lot more advanced from that perspective. But is there any reason that you see that outside of it being, you know, sort of we're still seen as one of the main financial hubs, or I say the city is very much seen that's allowed us to sort of that's allowed us to grow some of those amazing stories, the likes of those the Revolut and
I
Monzo
mean,
guys.
I think absolutely. You know, that is a global strength that we have, and so inevitably, growing out tech and innovation from those spaces makes an awful lot of sense. You know, you look what was in Silicon Valley in terms of its beginning of computing and chips and everything. You can see why they growth in product and that, you know, grew out of that area, because that's what they originally were specializing in. And then that grew such a wealth of money that then obviously they could continue to innovate and innovate. There's also absolutely, you know, the hope is obviously we can do more than just fintech, and we can see, you know, large companies coming out of other areas. But there's no doubt it's harder on this side of the pond, and it's a lot to do with attitude. You know, America is a frontier culture, right? It's a young country, it's a frontier culture, and it, you know, how much, and it obviously its religion really truly is capitalism, you know, as much as they would claim otherwise. And as a result of that, it is incredibly dog eat dog, right? And so the competitiveness there is phenomenal, and so and the focus on upside only is where they're at. You know, you see the legal difference between here and there. You know, we're always concentrating on the covering my arse and it all going wrong. They're like, I don't care about that. If it goes wrong, we've all lost anyway. Theirs is all like, make sure I'm eating as much of that upside as possible, because then I'll make the most money and then we do this again. So, and there's an optimism. Now that optimism probably has been checked a lot. You know, there's other stuff going on globally now that you know, obviously China's impact on the America being the sole place that everything can get done is obviously being challenged. So, you know, we live in interesting times in that front. Obviously, we'll get onto it, but AI is clearly going to be is the competitive field at the moment, and maybe crypto to a degree.
Yeah.
And you know, there's the things that are happening here in terms of government. You know, the growth plan that Matt Clifford worked on. You know, these are important things to not just completely lose our way in this new kind of race to bring in the new technologies there.
Yeah, I think you and I have had numerous conversations about the previous government's decision to reduce the R&D tax credit and sort of the pain in the ass that has become on that front. So you used the C word there, being China. So obviously we're the past 48 hours have been a bit of a.
I was using.
I know. I was like, which one was it there?
So with obviously we've in the past 72 hours we've had the Trump administration announce the Project Stargate with the OpenAI guys, the Microsoft guys, $500 billion being invested in data centers and microchips and all of these incredible projects. And then we've got 48 hours ago, China dropping DeepSeek, which I do think is a bit ridiculous, to actually name an AI after what it actually is supposed to do. Where's the GPT? Where's the
friendly interface that says we're not just
yeah,
to get into all of your lives?
exactly. Like, but the fact. So I haven't had enough time to dive into it. I know that they've open sourced a lot of the code, so it seems to be, from everything that I've read, they have been able to do it a lot in a lot more of an economical way. I'm just curious of your thought on like how much that then shake, because if you look at the OpenAI guys and the billions that they had to invest. NVIDIA obviously investing billions over the past 30 years to get to where they are now. And their share price is only back to where it was in October. So, nobody should be crying tears for them. But I think that it's sort of like I've seen people describe it as the Sputnik moment of the AI arms race.
Yeah, I think it's as per you. I've only had a sort of cursory look at what's in the papers this week to understand it. I think it is interesting that it's been done infinitely quicker and infinitely cheaper, and I think that's something to do with the maturity and bloatedness of the tech world in America. The cost of engineers, the arriving, just the escalation of prices for everybody, incredibly expensive, and the amount of funding you can get is huge. And therefore, your idea to be innovative and resourceful, because you've got a lack of resources, isn't there so much. It's something American irony could have a look at themselves. They kind of want to scale things so quickly that actually these companies get money very early, astronomical money. And then, there's no doubt human nature allows a certain amount of laziness to kind of come into it, because you've got the money to cover you for the next 5 years. So you're not going, right, we need to prove something in a week's time, in a month's time, and we've got limited resources and limited people. What can we do to get around that? So there's definitely a sense that the lack of resources to get them there has been a benefit to them. So they've been quite innovative in how they've done it. So I think that's something for Americans to keep an eye on, because just chucking money at stuff isn't always the answer, obviously. I do think it is there's I'm sure we'll talk quite a bit about AI, but there's essentially an arms race going on. This is the new Cold War, whatever you want to call it, and that's gonna the worrying thing about that is that, much like the nuclear race, it was a bunch of very, very powerful, rich, wealthy, deep ingrained men who are essentially not necessarily thinking about what is right to do, what is important, and what will impact the people in our societies. They just go, we want to beat that guy at doing this, and we want to be the best at this, without rethinking through what that generally means. And that's when, it's when the sort of staidness and bureaucracy and thought of Europe and its sort of ancientness in comparison, is often a useful check on that. But we're now escalating so quickly between the sort of Chinese and US axis that there's a chance that will just be ignored, and they'll continue to do what they do, and that potentially is quite troubling.
Yeah, so I suppose there's the three factors here that I'd love to get your take on, Richard. So obviously you've got the US, where the capital is I don't want to say the capital is abundant, but there's significantly more capital there to invest in these types of things. And we've all seen whether it's BlackRock, whether it's Sequoia, whether it's whether it's Grayscale or any of those guys, that they see this new technology, they throw money at it, and then that sort of encourages that behavior of bureaucracy and sort of abundanceness. You've then got sort of the Chinese side of things, which is okay, well, you're embargoing us getting access to the chips that you guys are using, so we're going to build something a lot faster, a lot cheaper, and a lot more efficiently. And then you've got Europe stuck in the middle, that is like, it's sort of trying its best to do some sort of regulations, whereas both of these other two economies are not regulating things. And then does that leave Europe ultimately, sort of hamstrung? If you look at, obviously, the economy changes. I think it was 10 years ago that the European economy and the US economy were on parity with each other, and now I think it's like a third of what the US economy is. Pam can fact check me. Can fact check me on those, just to be sure that I'm not spreading disinformation. But I suppose that's the sort of the worrying thing for me is. I'm sure that you've went to a convenience store, got a bottle of Coca-Cola, and the cap doesn't come off anymore. And having just come back from the States, I opened a cap and it came off, and I was like, "This is freedom." So from that point of view, you've got the Europeans that want to go and regulate. You've got the US that wants to just throw money at things, and then you've got the Chinese that just want to do things really efficiently. And it's sort of trying to figure out which of those approaches are the best. And I think that from my perspective, I certainly think that the European one is people trying to regulate stuff that they don't fully understand, so they can't really regulate it.
Firstly, you've clearly had the same experience as I have, which is you've tried to take the top off, and when you originally didn't realize it was meant to stay on, you ripped it off, and actually then ended up pronging something in your eye from it, because it's actually incredibly dangerous by keeping it on like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I fully am with you on that one. So look, I understand what they're trying to do, but Jesus, yeah, you're right. It does feel like nanny state operation.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Taylor Swift is putting millions of tons of CO2 into the atmosphere, traveling to her hundreds of gigs all around the world. But we have to suffer through bottle caps.
Yeah, let's not fall out over Swiftie. She's an artist, and quite frankly, like Musk, I wouldn't criticize her publicly, because you'll be gone in no time.
That's very true, Pamela. We'll maybe edit that out and put that in the blooper reel.
Secondly, to do with the Europe, China, US kind of apex going on, is it just depends what you believe. I mean, as an entrepreneur, as an investor, I obviously want things as deregulated as possible, because you're absolutely right that the state is so often behind from an intelligence point of view of understanding what the hell this is all about. I mean, if you remember watching Zuckerberg in Congress answering questions, and there were literally pretty things like, how do you turn the computer on, Zuck? It's like they had absolutely no idea. So the people in the legislature, I can't say that word, they are so distant from it. And that is a problem, because the law will be so distant from the speed of technology, and increasingly so. We've obviously found that gap already. So those things are a worry. And so you can either go, hey, fuck that, let's get AI into the world as quickly as possible. It benefits everyone ultimately. It will create more jobs. Happy days. And that's believing that the people at the top aren't rapacious capitalists who only give a shit about themselves. So it depends on the point of view you have. I think that Europe, whilst slower and more bureaucratic, has something to say about humankind, and at times just checking yourself. What are we racing towards, right? Other than probably, us not being on this planet for too long. So, even if you just look at the energy demands of AI, large language model, that alone, we're racing towards everyone driving electric cars. We're racing towards using large language models deployed all over the place. Both will drain the grid like quicker than anything, and we don't have the ability to cover that as yet. Now, we will get desperate, and innovation will kick in, and things are changing in terms of sustainable energy and all that stuff. But there will be a period of time when it hasn't hit it. There'll be techs in it, and possibly, it causes disruption, wars, energy crisis, and all sorts of other things. So it just depends whether you take the optimistic or the pessimistic hand on that one.
I'm going to take the optimistic view that innovation will be the thing that comes and sort of solves this problem for. However, I do think it's something that, as somebody that is building a platform that is focused on AI, and one of the thousands of other startups that are doing something similar, I do think that we do need to be ethically conscious of the environmental impact that it's having, especially whenever you see the tragic scenes coming out of LA. The place that you sort of think of as glamour is effectively now it effectively looks like a war zone. So I completely wiped off the map, and that is all. I think it's a ChatGPT query. So I know that I am a contributor to this. So I've tried to taper off my ChatGPT queries and go back to old fashioned Google, but it just doesn't deliver the same quality of insights that I want. But it's like I think it takes 10 times the amount of water for a ChatGPT request than it does for like a Google search, which to me is something that we need to be very conscious of.
And that's been the case, that we were always, you go, there's a rush. This is like the gold rush. There is money to be made here, so everyone is diving into it. And their first thought is not like, oh no, it's going to slightly drain the grid down the road. It isn't how it's going to work, which is where government intervention is going to be needed. But what that looks like and how fast they'll be, again, then there's too much money involved or at jeopardy, in which case they can lobby governments to make sure that doesn't happen. You end up in quite a challenging place.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you mentioned that the gold rush. There's it's going back to there's gold in them there hills where I've seen quite a few stories about the big players. So the Microsofts of the world are buying up cave complexes in like the Midwest. Obviously, the likes of Utah, they've got lots of mountain areas and a lot of deep caverns, deep caves, sort of that are sort of relics of the gold rush that they're now going to be putting data centers into because they're naturally like 30 or 40 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than if they were to have them in obviously the likes of Texas, where they would need to compensate for that. Not that those places in the Midwest aren't incredibly warm and arid, but there's those types of, it's that type of, that's not an innovation. That's just thinking outside the box to try and do this in a more economical way. So we're already starting to see sprouts of that coming about. So Richard,
so I was just gonna say you've got to wonder whether they also had those caves. So when the masses turn up with their pitchforks at their offices, they have somewhere to hide.
Well, I do think that sort of like it wasn't the greatest of looks, to be honest. At the inauguration, where you had sort of the three richest men in the world sort of sitting in front of the cabinet and right behind the president of the United States. But let's hope that sort of regulates itself.
Yeah, let's hope that's a good thing.
Yeah. And then so going back to where we started, Richard, and how you look at things. So I was chatting to Sadie, and I'm not sure whether this is public knowledge, so feel free to tell me if you don't want to touch upon it. But she was mentioning that you've just bought a film production company. So that to me obviously shouts passion project. So would love to hear a bit about that and what you're working on, and as well as that, the Broadway, the West End stuff. Would love to go into that and hear a bit about that, so that the guys can hear that. Look, you can work really hard at the start and put the effort in at the start, but then you can really start to enjoy your passion projects and things that you really enjoy. Not that you don't love talking to little twerps and dicks like me on a day-to-day basis, but from an actual passion and sort of love of the game perspective.
Yeah, no, well, so okay, there's two things. So let me talk about the musical first. So I was a breakdancer when I was a kid, and my favorite film in the world was a film called Beat Street, which came out in 1984. It was a seminal breakdance movie. There was another one called Breaking, also good, but it was set in the Bronx, which is where the origins of hip hop came from, and so it felt more authentic to a young, whatever I was, 9-year-old at the time, and I learned a lot of my moves off it and all that sort of stuff, and I it started my lifelong passion into kind of hip hop. Cue forward many years, and a colleague you also know, mine, Gabby Kahane, was hanging out with Arthur Baker on the that Miami cruise kind of summit at sea. Let's all get hammered in a cruise ship and pretend that we're doing networking and important things for technology. But hey, that's another story. Anyway, they were hanging out. Arthur Baker's a legendary producer who was on the original film as the music supervisor. And he said, "Oh, talk to Richard. He's an old hip hop fan. I know you're trying to take this thing to Broadway." And that was a few years back. So I've helped him buy the rights for the film MGM, and yeah, we're developing it. We brought on Nas. Nas is the legendary 90s rapper, whose album Illmatic is one of the classic hip hop albums of all time. Please visit if you haven't. One of his favorite films also happens to be Beat Street. We knew this from one of his interviews he'd done. Connected up. He was really interested in getting involved. So we're kind of on the, we're in sort of early mid development of it. We're just
Amazing.
a great writer to it. So, it won't be on stage for 3-4 years, but yeah, it's a real fascinating one to develop. And what the hell do I know about producing Broadway? Not an awful lot. So I have to surround myself with really good people. I'm learning a lot every single day, and yeah, that's really exciting.
Yeah.
And it's just the creative arts I love in all forms. I'm not even a massive musical fan, but I believe all the elements of hip hop can make an incredibly compelling live show. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Well, I think like it's obviously not hip hop, but we've obviously all seen the success of Hamilton with bringing an incredibly it's obviously an incredible story about one of the American founding fathers. But if you were to sit down and pitch that as a musical to someone, you'd be like, there's no way that this is going to be world touring, incredibly successful stage show. I think I've seen it 3 times, but like it's
amazing. Yeah, and Lin-Manuel is he's obviously a huge hip hop fan. He's a phenomenal rapper as well as talented artist in multitude of ways, and it was a really smart thing to do because the kind of founding fathers were quite gangster in themselves, because at the game it was a frontier culture. They needed to kind of battle each other to fight to get to what was the current kind of formulation of America. And so it kind of suited the story. So absolutely, it's at least opened the eyes to say hip hop can be anywhere near Broadway, because previously it's really suffered from, that's a street urban thing, you shouldn't really bring it into this high art. There's been a lot of snobbery, to be honest, and actually we want to take a more pure hip hop show and put it on there, because actually it is about saying, for God's sake, it's about time that one of the most powerful creative forces that has been incepted into every possible form of culture should actually have its place on stage and Broadway. So
100%. And I think that we've obviously we're starting to see more of this, like obviously Six, again, another incredible, not I wouldn't classify it as hip hop, but more contemporary and more, it opens up. It means the musicals aren't just for the people that as people would think of going to a musical, they think of going with their spectacles and their and their best suit and so on. But I think the more that
ironically, what I do know, if you're going to have a hit on Broadway or the West End or anywhere, is you've got to bring in a new younger audience, but you also need to keep the bespectacled audience pretty happy. So interesting, it's getting that mass mainstream version of it that works, feels credible enough, feels edgy enough and right for the movement, and also appeals to a broad audience. So it's a real challenge. I have no idea whether we're going to get there, but it's going to be a lot of fun trying. So,
no, if there's one thing that I know about you, Richard, is you will get there by some method. You will get there
somehow. We'll see.
Exactly. So, Richard, just want to close things off. First of all, from an investee to an investor, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. I know how precious your time is. Where can people find you? Where can people find out about the Friday Club and all of that good stuff and everything that you're up to? That's if you want them to find you. It's completely fine if you don't want them to find you.
Yeah. These days I'm trying to hide. I mean, funny enough, I said the Friday Club, which we didn't really talk about, was just something I set up in those early days investing. I come from a marketing world. I was seeing those entrepreneurs. They needed help with sort of branding, marketing. So we just set up the Friday Club to kind of put the two together to do sort of bi-monthly events where startups come in with sort of marketing challenges in their business and marketers kind of mentor them on it. We haven't, funnily enough, we took a bit of a break from doing it for the last year or so. We're probably coming back mid-year this year. If you're interested in that, then probably contacting me. If you're a startup interested in having a marketing problem solved, then probably contact me via LinkedIn. Equally, if you're a marketing brand person in in a corporation, in agency, or wherever, then feel free to reach out to me for me to add you to the possible event list for that later on this year. We'll be doing an AI related one probably in the next few months. And so if you're in that space and of interest, then feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah. And what I would say is for the salespeople out there, for the bots out there on LinkedIn, do not contact him via LinkedIn or any other method, because if there's one thing that I know about Richard is he has a keen nose for bullshit. And there's absolutely no point. So don't go down the fruitless route of trying to sell him, because he's given you contact routes now, because he is incredible at finding what is meaningful and what's not meaningful. So Richard, thank you so much for taking the time, and I can't thank you enough.
Well, the inevitably, firstly, thank you for having me very much. I didn't get the one shout out I should get out, actually, even though it's way off actually probably launching, which is the first feature film that I've exec produced, was out of the production company, which I didn't buy. We set up, actually, my wife Jane set it up, and we've got a few partners in it. But the first film that we produced is a film called In the Shadows. True story of a lady called Ramla Ali, who was a Somalian refugee, left war to Somalia, came here, got bullied, got into boxing, became a boxing champion. She also was in the Somalian Olympic team, the first one ever created. It's her true story. It's starring Jasmine Jobson, who is the one of the leads in Top Boy, which you might have seen on.
Amazing, yes.
She's phenomenal in it. She can light up a room or look like a killer, and depending on which mood she's in. So we're incredibly excited about it. It's an amazing performance from her. We won't be launching it probably till later on in the year, one of the film festivals, but it should be in cinemas towards the end of the year or early next year, at which time I'll be promoting it on every channel I can, of course. But supporting British film and films at cinema, for God's sake, keep going to the cinema, people, because it won't be there otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. Although I will have to ask you then, because we had an actor on the, I think it was our second guest podcast. What was your opinion on Gladiator 2, if you've seen it yet?
Funnily enough, I did see it in the cinema, and more for me, because clearly it's definitely designed to be seen on a big screen. Having then watched it on a smaller, big TV, but smaller, I would say I was pretty appalled by the CGI. I'll tell you that.
Yep.
I thought the first half, those battle scenes were just some of the worst CGI I've seen for a while. And given it's Ridley Scott, and given his, it just feels like he's going, look, I'm really old now. I can't spend another year in post-production. So there was a bit of that. I was disappointed by that. And then, having been a massive fan of the first one, it felt like a sort of light retread of really where we'd been before. So it didn't quite hit me in the way it should have.
I think, there's that whole trending TikTok thing of how often do men think of the Roman Empire, and I'm one of those people that think about it constantly. Like, I'll fall asleep listening to audiobooks about it for I don't know why.
Therapy one where that's let's not go there now. That's
but being a minor student or a sort of like an infrequent student of history, with the second that I saw the sharks in the Colosseum, I was like, what the fuck? Ridley Scott, stop making epic movies. Like the Napoleon movie as well. The Battle of Austerlitz did not happen on a frozen lake.
Yeah,
like just stop it.
The old history and being true to history versus drama and dramatic. I think the Frozen Lake I thought was interesting, and I added a bit more drama, but fair enough for the purists. I get it. But you're right on the sharks and the whatever, the chimpanzees that were going nuts, or whichever ones they were. You're like, come on, guys, it's all got a little bit.
Like a guy coming out riding a rhino like a horse. I was like, what the fuck?
Well, the people think it was doing little dressage with it. It was like,
it's like what is this?
You learn to ride one, you learn to like tippy-toe around it.
Like, fuck's sake. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
One last question from my side. What is this gold plate behind you? Is that anything exciting?
Yeah, so sorry, I explained this early on. It's
apologies.
not because I had a Christmas. It's not because I had a Christmas number one in the 80s. For my 40th birthday, which unfortunately was 10 years ago, depressingly, Grandmaster Flash and Norman Jay played at it, and they did that as a present for me. They signed it and gold disced it and did it. So he gets pride of place. Pride of place up there.
Brilliant.
It makes everyone think I'm in the record industry for no reason.
No, it's good.
He was also a member of E17, which he doesn't like to talk about.
Seriously.
Yeah, I'm bringing out a documentary about how I was abused by the manager very soon, obviously. Do it at the moment.
Fantastic.
Brilliant.
Fantastic.
just foray.